In this video, I'm going to be counting down the top 10 best unique melee weapons in Skyrim. These weapons will easily carry you through the game's toughest fights, and by the way, make sure you stick around for number 1 as it makes you pretty much unkillable. Kicking off our list is Dawnbreaker, Meridia's iconic flaming sword of light. Don't let this weapon's modest base damage fool you. This Daedric artifact absolutely decimates enemies, both living and dead, being arguably the most powerful weapon in the game when it comes to dealing with the latter. Which is pretty useful given there are a huge number of undead in Skyrim, especially in the main story. Dawnbreaker allows you to clear out annoying draugr-infested crypts in record time, with every strike having the chance to instantly kill undead enemies or send them running for their lives. Well, their afterlives, I suppose. Even against regular enemies, the 10 points of burn damage on hit still gives you a nice little edge, especially early on, and it even offers you a very niche utility when fighting trolls, due to the fire damage preventing them from being able to regenerate their health. As you can see, it's a one-handed sword, so you can pair it with a shield or spell, which makes it perfect for a paladin or battle mage type playstyle, or just for anyone who's tired of draugr deathlords ruining their day. In terms of drawbacks, I already mentioned that Dawnbreaker does have a lower base damage than some of the late game swords, so its effectiveness against living enemies in particular does start to drop off compared to other weapons. And it's also worth mentioning that its special effect against undead can be a bit problematic when it causes enemies to flee into adjacent rooms, potentially drawing additional enemies into the fight. Getting hold of Dawnbreaker is pretty straightforward, and it can be done fairly early in the game. You'll need to find Meridia's beacon, which can be found randomly in end of dungeon boss chests after level 12, and looting this beacon will start a Daedric quest named the Break of Dawn. Basically, Meridia, the Daedric Prince of Life, will task you with cleansing her temple of a particularly nasty necromancer, and once you've done so, she'll present you with Dawnbreaker as a reward. Sliding in at number 9 is the Assassin's Best Friend, the Blade of Woe. This is a unique dagger revered by stealth players for having the highest base damage of any unique dagger in Skyrim, equal to a Dragonbone dagger, as well as also having a useful enchantment that absorbs 10 points of health on hit. But the true power of this dagger comes when it's paired with the Assassin's Blade perk, which causes sneak attacks of a dagger to cause 15 times more damage, which, due to the weapon's high base damage, means that a stealth attack with the Blade of Woe can very easily one-shot nearly any target in the game. You can even go a step further and pair the Blade of Woe with other gear such as the Shrouded Gloves or Cicero's Gloves that give double backstab damage, the combination of which add up to an absolutely ludicrous amount of damage from stealth. The health absorb on the Blade of Woe also means that if a stealth kill fails and you end up in open combat, then each quick dagger thrust is partially healing you, which can be surprisingly effective at keeping a fragile assassin alive. In terms of downsides, being a dagger, the Blade of Woe does have a very short reach, meaning that you have to get extremely close to land hits, which is fine for backstabs, but riskier in open combat. It also has a much weaker absorb health enchant than could be achieved by a high level enchanter using a Dragonbone dagger for example, but that's a lot more effort than just acquiring the Blade of Woe. Speaking of which, there are 2 main ways to acquire it. Firstly, you can join the Dark Brotherhood and progress most of the way through the story until you reach the quest Death Incarnate, during which you'll be given the Blade of Woe by Astrid in a rather dramatic scene. Or, if you don't want to play the Dark Brotherhood questline, then you can simply kill Astrid and loot the blade from her during the first quest in the Dark Brotherhood questline, in which you're abducted and taken to the abandoned shack. I'll link a video on how to join the Dark Brotherhood in more detail in the description down below. There's also a third rather cheeky method in which you use the misdirection perk in the pickpocket skill tree in order to steal the Blade of Woe from Astrid while you're in the abandoned shack. And by doing this, you'll be able to get the Blade of Woe much earlier on and still continue the Dark Brotherhood questline. It just involves a bit more faff to level your pickpocket skill tree first. Anyway, next up at number 8 we have the Mace of Molag Bal, a brutal one-handed mace that's as wicked as its Daedric patron. This spiked club offers high base damage, the ability to drain 25 points of magicka and stamina with every hit, and it also soul traps your enemy upon death, providing you have an appropriate soul gem in your inventory. The combination of high base damage paired with these magical effects makes this weapon highly effective for both tank and battle mage style builds. You can use this mace to really bully enemy melee fighters, with each swing draining their stamina, meaning that bandit chief trying to power attack you suddenly can't. Likewise, pesky enemy mages will find their magicka reserves evaporating due to the drain magicka effect, leaving them unable to cast spells. And of course the soul trap effect is a pretty sweet bonus as well, as it offers a great quality of life feature for those who want to level up enchanting. The main drawback here is that it's a mace, so it's heavy and it has a pretty slow swing speed. You have to be okay with a slower pace of combat compared to swords or daggers, for example. But outside of that, it's just a very well-rounded weapon that will fit into plenty of different builds. To get your hands on the mace, you'll need to complete the House of Horrors quest in Markarth, and the great news is that you can start this quest at any level, which is actually another reason why it's so deserving of a spot on this list. You simply need to head to Markarth and look for a vigilant named Tyrannus who'll give you the quest. All you need to do is follow this quest to completion, and you'll receive the Mace of Molag Bal as a reward. Next up at number 7 is Mirak's Sword, which boasts the highest base damage of any one-handed sword in the game, even slightly edging out a Dragonbone sword. On top of that, it's absurdly lightweight, meaning that the sword's able to dish out extremely fast power attacks with a low stamina cost per swing. Then, to really compound that playstyle, the sword's enchantment also absorbs 15 points of stamina per hit, which effectively feeds you more stamina to continue chaining power attacks, ultimately allowing you, with the right build, to power attack all day long, dishing out incredible amounts of damage. The main drawback of Mirak's Sword doesn't come down to any limitation of the weapon itself, but rather when you get it. Mirak's Sword can only be obtained at the very end of the Dragonborn DLC's main questline after defeating Mirak himself. So by the time you earn this sword, you're likely already quite a high level and you probably already have some other top tier weapons. And because defeating Mirak's typically quite a late game activity, you're going to be limited to how much of your adventure you can use it for, which ultimately is why it's not further up the list. As mentioned, if you want to get hold of Mirak's Sword, then you'll have to complete the Dragonborn DLC's main questline, culminating in the final battle with Mirak in the realm of Apocrypha. Technically, you can start this questline at any level, but I certainly wouldn't recommend starting it before level 20 with a reasonably well thought out build, as you're likely going to get your ass handed to you unless you're on a very, very low difficulty setting. Moving on to number 6 on our list, which is Mehrunes' Razor, a dagger that's often underestimated due to the Blade of Woe having a higher base damage. However, Mehrunes' Razor is arguably the deadliest dagger or even weapon in the entire game thanks to its unique effect. Basically, the dagger has a 2% chance to instantly kill your opponent, which might not seem that high, but if you're on a high difficulty setting and rapidly swinging dagger attacks into a high health enemy, it won't take long before that effect procs and instantly kills that enemy. And yes, that includes enemies like high level dragons and giants. Mehrunes' Razor can one-bang them. It also never needs recharging because the instant kill effect isn't even a normal enchantment with a limited number of charges. So while the Blade of Woe is king in terms of maximizing sneak attack damage, Mehrunes' Razor also offers an extremely high damage in this regard, as well as having great application in more open melee combat, which in my view gives it the edge. In terms of downsides, the most obvious drawback is the dagger's reliance on RNG. You can't guarantee the razor's instant kill effect when you need it. Sometimes it'll trigger on the very first hit of a fight, which feels glorious, but equally it might not even trigger at all in a long drawn out battle. Therefore you can't plan your entire strategy around it always working. Then of course it has the normal limitations of daggers in open melee combat, primarily being their short reach and lower base damage, meaning that fights can really drag on if you don't get that insta-kill proc. To claim Mehrunes' Razor, you'll need to travel to the museum in Dawnstar and speak to Silas Vessius. This will send you on a quest that will culminate in a choice as to whether you kill or spare Vessius himself. It's critically important here that you side with Mehrunes' Dagon and take out Vessius in order to receive the dagger as your reward. Speaking of rewards, if you're enjoying my content and want access to more RPG guides and discussions, then you can access a whole bunch of additional content by becoming a YouTube member or by joining my Patreon. If you're interested, then you can find links to become a YouTube member or Patreon in the description down below. And of course, all support to the channel is greatly appreciated. Anyway, crushing its way into the number 5 spot is Volendrung, the mighty Daedric Warhammer. We've exclusively covered one-handed weapons up until this point, but if you prefer your melee weapons big, brutal, and incredibly unsubtle, then this might be the one for you. Volendrung hits like a truck, with its base damage being equal to that of a Daedric Warhammer, but what really sets it apart is its enchantment that absorbs 50 points of stamina on each hit. Essentially, every time you clobber an enemy with Volendrung, you siphon a huge chunk of their stamina to yourself. Now, for a two-handed warrior, stamina is life, and Volendrung's stamina absorption allows you to keep up a relentless assault on your enemies without your stamina starting to run dry. Basically, it allows you to stay energized whilst your enemies become increasingly exhausted. As it's a warhammer, it's also particularly powerful against heavily armoured foes due to the 25% ignore armour perk that you can pick up in the two-handed skill tree. Though on the flip side, being a warhammer, Volendrung is also incredibly heavy and slow. You're not going to be winning any fencing duels with this one. Each swing is something of a commitment, so timing and positioning are crucial to avoid missing your opponent and leaving yourself open to a counterattack. Also, because it relies on you hitting your enemy to replenish stamina, if you are in a fight where you're missing a lot and the enemy's very mobile, then you won't be able to take advantage of the weapon's key feature. To acquire the weapon, you're going to need to head to the Orc stronghold of Lagerspur, which can be found in the Rift, and you'll need to complete a quest called the Cursed Tribe. It's pretty simple, you just need to show up at the fort, let the scenario play out, and follow the quest to completion. Once you do so, Malakath will reward your efforts by presenting you with this mighty mace. Now, despite the next weapon only making it to number 4 on the list due to me trying to be effectively as objective as possible, this one is my personal favourite weapon, and that is Chillrend. A very cool looking pale blue glass sword that at max level boasts the same damage as a crafted dragonbone sword, which immediately makes it one of the most powerful one-handed weapons in the game. But it doesn't stop there. Chillrend also carries a powerful enchantment that deals 30 points of frost damage and has the chance to paralyze the target for 2 seconds. So not only does it hit punishingly hard, it also gives you the hilarious experience of watching enemies suddenly stiffen up and tip over because Chillrend has frozen them solid. Some large enemies such as dragons are immune to this effect, but in the majority of fights it renders enemies ineffective for a large chunk of the battle and can arguably trivialize many encounters. I'd argue the downsides to Chillrend are also pretty minor. The first one is that it's leveled, meaning that if you obtain it at low level, then the version you get will have a lower base damage and a weaker frost enchantment. Which is a bit annoying as you have to wait until level 46 to get the very best out of this weapon, which is a level that many people don't even reach in their playthrough. And the other drawback is that some enemies are just resistant or immune to frost or paralysis. I already mentioned dragons, but it's also the case that all Nord enemies have a 50% frost resistance, so the damaging effect of Chillrend will only be half as effective. And then you have many of the Dwemer Automata, for example, who are just totally immune to frost damage, meaning that there are situations where Chillrend is actually quite a lot weaker than other weapons. To get hold of Chillrend, you're going to need to progress the Thieves Guild questline until you reach a quest called The Pursuit. During this quest, you'll be able to steal the blade from the house of Mercer Frey. Alternatively, if you don't want to join the Thieves Guild, you can actually reach Chillrend without officially starting that quest at all. This basically involves simply stealing it from Mercer Frey's house without starting the quest. However, because the door was barred, you're going to need to do a little parkour between roofs to actually get into the house through the balcony. Once you do get inside, you're going to need to deal with some traps and then head into the basement where you'll find Chillrend displayed in a locked case. I think it's an expert level lock. Pop open the case and Chillrend is yours. Coming in at the number 3 spot is the Ebony Blade, a two-handed katana with a dark hunger. Now, at first glance, the Ebony Blade might seem quite underwhelming. After all, it only has a base damage of around 11, which isn't particularly high for a two-hander, and it starts off by dealing only 10 points of health absorption per hit. However, this blade has a hidden feature. The more treacherous deeds you perform with it, the stronger it becomes. In gameplay terms, this means that you need to use the Ebony Blade to kill NPCs who trust you, such as followers or allies. And each such betrayal feeds the blade's power, up to a total of 10 kills. Then, when fully powered, the Ebony Blade will absorb 30 points of health per hit, an effect that never depletes or needs recharging. This creates the effect of a very powerful vampiric siphon, where every swing you make heals you for 30 points whilst hurting your enemy for the same amount. This effect, combined with the fast swing speed of the Ebony Blade, turns you into a near unstoppable force. Because as long as you're hitting something, you're regenerating health, and it's incredibly difficult to kill you. Honestly, it almost feels like cheating with the right build to support it, as you just feel, like I said, unkillable as long as you continue to swing the blade. However, there are a few catches that keep the ebony blade from ranking even higher. One of which is, of course, the fact that the weapons in ranks 1 and 2 are even more overpowered, but it's also the fact that to get the absolute most out of the blade, you will have to betray and kill friendly NPCs, which just might not gel with the role-playing experience that you want and could completely ruin your run. And there's also the fact that, like I said previously, the weapon does have a relatively low base damage, so if your build is based on dealing the absolute maximum damage per hit, then you're probably going to want to look elsewhere. To get hold of the Ebony Blade, you'll need to complete the Whispering Door quest in Whiterun, which becomes available after you reach at least level 20 and have completed the Dragon Rising quest, which is the part of the main quest where you slay your first dragon. Once you've met these 2 requirements, you'll need to go around asking NPCs whether they've heard any rumours until you get a quest prompt about Jarl Balgruf's child, Nelkir. You then need to simply follow this quest to completion and you'll receive the Ebony Blade as your reward, as well as some instructions from Mephala around how to go about feeding your new toy to maximise its power. Moving on to our runner-up at number 2, which is the Longhammer, an innocuous sounding name for what is arguably the highest DPS melee weapon in the entire game. That is for those who know how to use it. The Longhammer is a unique orcish warhammer that has a very special property, and that is that it swings 30% faster than a typical warhammer. Now, warhammers are the heaviest, slowest weapons in Skyrim, but also the hardest hitting per swing and the best for dealing with heavily armoured enemies. Therefore, the 30% swing speed bonus effectively removes the disadvantages of a warhammer while maintaining all of the advantages. And what's more, unlike many unique weapons, the Longhammer has no built-in enchantment, which means 2 things. Firstly, you can enchant it yourself to add whatever extra damage or effects you like, and secondly, it means that you can exploit the Elemental Fury Shout for absurd swing speed and devastating damage potential. The Longhammer only has one real weakness as far as I'm concerned, and that's the fact that its base damage is that of an orcish warhammer, which means that Ebony, Daedric and Dragonbone all deal more damage per hit, and in fact Stalrim as well if you're looking at DLCs. However, none of them can come close to matching the swing speed of the Longhammer, which means that it still outclasses all of them in most scenarios. It's an incredibly powerful weapon, it offers a fun playstyle, and it absolutely deserves its spot at number 2 on this list. Better still, the Longhammer is simply hidden in a cave rather than given as a quest reward, which means you can go and grab it at any time you feel ready. This cave is called Liar's Retreat and it can be found in the Reach to the southwest of Solitude. I'm showing it on the map right now. You simply need to enter the cave, clear out a bunch of Falmer, and you'll find the Longhammer lying next to its previous owner in the final chamber. Finally, claiming the number 1 spot on our list is the legendary Windshear, a weapon so notoriously powerful that many consider it to be downright game-breaking. Windshear is a unique scimitar that doesn't seem to be anything special at first glance. It looks incredibly plain, and it offers a pretty low base damage compared to other one-handed weapons in the list. However, it's broken. I don't know a better way to describe it. Basically, every time you use a bash attack with Windshear, which is when you hold block and then press attack, it will stagger the enemy, which allows you to continually weave bashes with normal attacks to effectively stun lock the enemy and render them completely useless. I'm pretty sure this is a bug or certainly unintended behaviour, as it's just stupidly overpowered. It even works on dragons. And if done right, you're essentially unkillable. Which is why, from an objective perspective, it's very difficult to consider anything but Windshear as the most powerful weapon in the game. The stagger impact doesn't even rely on a charge, so it can basically be used infinitely. Like I said, broken. I'd suggest that the only downside to Windshear is that it actually makes the game too easy, as it even works on the hardest difficulty to completely trivialise fights. That's a very boring and tedious way to play the game in my opinion, but there it is. My advice would actually be not to spoil the game by using this weapon to cheese every fight, maybe just hold it back in reserve if it's a fight that you're particularly struggling with. But that's up to you. Even the fact that it has a low base damage is pretty much irrelevant because nothing can ever hit you back, so it's just a matter of time until the enemy's demise. In terms of getting hold of Windshear, it is something of a secret weapon in the sense that the game never explicitly points you to it, you have to know where to look. It's found during the final Dark Brotherhood quest on board the Emperor's ship, the Kataraya. Once you've infiltrated the ship, instead of rushing straight to assassinate the target, you're going to need to take a detour onto the deck of the Kataraya. From there, carefully walk up the long beam at the front of the ship, and at the very tip of that beam, or whatever the proper nautical term is for it, you'll find a sword lodged in the wood. That's wind shear. And it's pretty easy to overlook if you're not exploring, since it's not directly in your path on the assassination. All you have to do is prize it from the wood, and it's yours. Now, admittedly, identifying the top 10 melee weapons in Skyrim is highly subjective, and it will vary based on builds and playstyles. I've tried to be as objective as I can, but I'd bet that every experienced Skyrim player will have their own thoughts on this topic, and I'm really interested to hear your top 10 in the comments down below. Also, if you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to my channel for more RPG content. And as I mentioned earlier, I offer a whole range of bonus content for YouTube members and Patreons that you can get access to by following the links in the description down below. Either way, thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.